Good evening, everybody. It's 8 p.m. Eastern Time on November 11th, November 8th, 2024. Just waiting for some people to hop on. I'm just going to do a short stream tonight, kind of just talk a little bit about the election that just recently happened here in the United States of America. Of course, our largest audience is in the States, but we do have people throughout the world. And so for those of you who'd like to kind of talk about your thoughts on this election in the chat, now would be an opportunity. All that I ask is that people be uh, courteous and try to be as gracious as you can, regardless of what side you fell on this whole thing. Before I get started in talking about the effect, because really, honestly, I think it's important to talk about the major role that evangelicals have played in the elections for Trump. They were the largest, single most powerful group within the coalition that elected Donald Trump to president in 2016, and of course, reelected him here in 2024. Also interesting to see some trends happening in Utah, but Trump won Utah very comfortably in this election as well. Last time I checked, it was close to 60% of the vote. That may have changed a little bit. So I just want to remind everybody, people are just starting to hop on now. We're a minute in. Just make sure if you can do a sound check in the chat, let me know that you can hear me. Typically people say they can't, so I'm guessing you can hear me just fine. Now, I imagine a lot of us are experiencing election fatigue right now. This has been a very stressful time for people in America, especially, and I imagine for people throughout the world just watching, because what happens in America does affect the rest of the world. Unlike what happens in most countries, elections don't have quite the same effect as what happens here. America is still the most powerful, most influential country in the world. And so our elections not only have consequences for its citizens, but it has consequences for the rest of the world. Now, I'm only speaking on this because I do have a degree of expertise in politics. I don't like to talk about things I don't know a whole lot about, but I was somebody who was involved in politics when I was younger. I was a professional political consultant. I ran for county commissioner in the second largest county in the state of Indiana, leading the ticket that year for the Republican Party, and didn't win. So I've been also basically a lifelong Republican too. So this speaks me on so many different levels. And I kind of think it's really important. And Bruce Nelson, Stephen, I'm glad for people to know that I am a subscriber. Well, great. Thanks, Bruce, for saying that. And I really do appreciate the subscribers we have here on the channel. And also the people that financially support us. It's greatly appreciated. So I just wanted to kind of talk. I don't typically get into politics on my program. You know, this is the Switzerland of Mormonism, and I try to be even neutral in many ways when it comes to politics. That doesn't mean that I don't have opinions. I certainly do have opinions, and I'm not afraid to share them. I typically share my opinions my personal opinions on other channels as opposed to mine, because I don't want to make this channel about me. I want to make it about my guests. So that's why I don't really talk about myself or give too much of my views. I think people who watch me enough kind of get a general idea of where I'm coming from. And it's very warm here in Florida, by the way. My goodness, it's unseasonably warm. It feels like August the last few days, but we do have some cold air coming in next week. So, and we are recovering from the storm. IDK 4003 says, "Hi, Steve. Hi, good to see you in the chat again. You've been an active participant recently, and we do appreciate your contributions to the chat. Also, for those of you who are watching this live, this is an opportunity to ask me questions, give me comments, or anything like that as well. Also, I want to remind people to give a thumbs up on this video so that it gets in front of more people as well, because most people who watch this actually watch it after the live stream. I'm trying to be consistent in coming out at 6 p.m. Mountain Time on Fridays. One, because nobody else is doing it in that time slot, and two, I just want people to get used to watching my live stream and kind of get, and again, you don't have to, but I kind of like use this as an opportunity to talk directly to the audience, but also kind of talk about what's on my mind. It's a stream of consciousness live stream, if you will. I don't really normally have notes or anything prepped. And I sometimes wonder, should I have notes for this one? Because this is going to be kind of controversial, talking about politics. And I'm going to try to go straight down the middle on this one as I possibly can. One, because I have friends. I have many friends that voted for Trump. I have many friends that voted for Kamala Harris. I have many friends that voted third party. I have friends that didn't vote. So I'm still friends with those people. I've made it very clear. I am not going to make this about my friendship is going to be based on who you vote for. Earlier this year, I was interviewed by my pastor, Dan Miner, and I said, it's if you think that becoming friends or losing friends over who you're going to vote for, that's pitiful. You got to understand people are complicated, complex people, and they do things for certain reasons. And it's not just one or two things that you think are the most important thing, or not necessarily the motivations for why people vote the way they do. And I think it's really important that we kind of just take a little political history lesson of what I think happened over the course of the 30 plus years that basically gave us Donald Trump. And I think it's actually everybody needs to look in the mirror on this one, especially the Democrats, because I think the Democrats in many ways are primarily responsible for giving us Donald Trump in many ways. And let me explain. Bambi 1830 gives the Switzerland flag. Thanks for joining us, Bambi. So in the 1990s, I started getting involved in politics, and I was actually involved in a congressional campaign in which we ran as a basically kind of a populist campaign that was anti-NAFTA and was pro Blue Collar. So basically, not necessarily pro union because it's Republican, but definitely pro like Buy American. Now you have to understand, I grew up in Northwest Indiana. That's the heart of steel country, Gary, Indiana. We, as a family, we were Republicans, so we weren't necessarily a union family, but we were a family. Our family never bought foreign cars. We always bought American. We always bought made in the USA. We just, whenever possible, we always bought American made products. I was raised with those values. And this is the thing, is that most of these households, these company towns, were based in the Midwest. So you had like Maytag, Whirlpool, all these different companies that were company towns. And what's the one thing? Remember those Maytag commercials where they had the Maytag repairman? And the joke was he was never getting a phone call because the Maytags were built great. Well, that was kind of like what America was known for. It's manufacturer based in the Midwest. Well, let's go back a little bit further. But in 1989, there's this Democrat congressman from California named Tony Colillo. And he decided that Democrats need to make a play. This was after Dukakis got blown out of the water in 1988. He decided that Democrats need to make a play for corporate money and support. So that's what kind of realigned the Democrat Party and to become more business friendly and less labor friendly. But still depending on labor votes and blue collar workers votes to get elected. And Bruce Nelson says, amen. Offhand, I can't think of a reason to write off another person as a potential friend. We haven't all walked in each other's shoes. Amen to that. And I think it's really important for us to hear this message. So basically, the very, very first candidate to be run under this new Democrat label or new Democrat way of doing things was, of course, Bill Clinton, who got elected in 1992. What was the state that Bill Clinton did best in the country that year? About the best state he did in was West Virginia. He would also be reelected in 1996, and the best state he did in 1996 was West Virginia. Guess who has been the best state for Donald Trump these last three election cycles? I think every time, if not, but basically the top state. And Wyoming might have beat out this year percentage-wise, but basically for the three elections, West Virginia has been the top votes for Donald Trump. Now you understand, in the 1990s, West Virginia was one of the most Democrat states in the country, and the Midwest was pretty solidly, it was all these company towns, all these, you had Flint, Michigan, you had all these cities that had all this manufacturing. They were all Democrats. It's all Democrats. It's all Democrats, and it was all union. These are good paying jobs, and they created high quality products. Keep this in mind, high quality products. These people keep on talking about how free trade is this great thing. On paper, it is. But what was the cost? The ultimate cost? Well, what happened was Bill Clinton decided to sign into the law NAFTA, come to the agreement with NAFTA, and he was an advocate for it. Now, I was part of a campaign, and I was part of a movement within the Republican Party that was against NAFTA. And NAFTA goes through with the support of the Democrats and some Republicans, of course, because the Republicans are traditionally, free trade. And that essentially what that did was that was the beginning of the end of the industrial Midwest. Now, what was replaced? What was replaced in these communities? Well, what happened was you had a lot of company towns shut down. And the result, you have these communities were in absolute shambles. So now you have a lot of people that are suffering depression and all these other kind of things. You have suicide rates go up. And next thing you know, what happens? Big pharma comes along with these happy pills, or these pills that take the pain away. And we saw what just alone what happened with West Virginia was devastating. So now you had a solid industrial Midwest that created everything, most of our products in America, they're high quality. They were well built. When you bought a refrigerator, when you bought a stove, when you bought a washing machine, when you got married, chances are many of those products would last the length of your marriage. And I mean, we had an air conditioner that, was 40, 50 years old at our house. I think it was like probably about 40 years old, at least we had. And I think it was still running when my parents sold the place. So the fact is that American products lasted long. They were well built. You had these communities that were flourishing. And Bubba and his crew, the New Democrats, came in and eviscerated the working class, basically stabbing blue collar people in the back. And then we have the crisis, the drug crisis happening in these same communities, because these people are hopeless. They've lost everything. They're devastated. So then we get also this. The fact is that we have this guy in the 90s named Bill Clinton, who, what was he? Who was a serial adulterer. Credible rape claims were made against him. He shady business dealings, a man who lied about everything. And this was essentially paved the way for Donald Trump, because the Democrats defended this guy. And to this day, they still associate with the Clintons. And I'm like, as somebody who's not a fan of Donald Trump, the Democrats never gave me a reason to say, okay, I'll go support you guys, because any party that embraces the Clintons, but then condemns the Republicans for embracing the Trumps, is the height of hypocrisy. As far as with the Chinese Communist Party that was going on, the connections there. I mean, people forget about this. There was foreign interference going on back then in the 90s through China. People forget all this stuff. So I just don't get how the Democrats could be taken seriously as an alternative to Donald Trump when they never renounced the Clintons. Does that make any sense to you all? Okay, so a few other things happened in the 90s we saw the rise of populism. So you had Ross Perot's campaign in 92. You also had Pat Buchanan's campaign in 92, in which he scored a very shocking 37% in the New Hampshire primary in 1992 against the sitting president. That was the first sign that there was a shifting going on in American politics. Ross Perot goes on the Larry King show that spring and says, if you can get me on the ballot in all 50 states, I'll run for president of the United States. In June of 1992, Ross Perot is leading the ticket with 36% of the vote. George H.W. Bush had 33%, and Bill Clinton was at 30%. Then something happened. He drops out. He kind of flaked out, but he then did re-enter the race towards the end of the campaign, and still scored almost 20% of the vote in the popular vote. Then you saw the rise of Pat Buchanan as the runner-up in 1996 for president of the United States against Bob Dole. So you kind of see that a lot of the foundations for what led to the rise of Trump were being set in the 1990s. And the fruition of all of this was a perfect storm. So you have the Democrat Party to defend somebody like Bill Clinton, therefore saying that it's okay to be a sexual predator. It's okay to sleep with an intern. Think about this. This is crazy. She was a kid. Okay. And all the other things. It's okay to be involved in shady business deals. It's okay. All these kind of things. The Democrats defended the Clintons. And as a result, I don't know how they could go after Donald Trump unless they would have renounced the Clintons. Instead, what they do, they nominated Bill Clinton's wife, Hillary. So that's what happens. A lot of it's just like a little history lesson. Now, one thing I found very interesting is Bernie Sanders put out a tweet the other day saying that, there's a reason why this happened. There's a lot of angry people in America, and the Democrats need to listen to these people. And they didn't. Bernie Sanders is not blaming Republicans for this one. Bernie Sanders was also kind of a similar candidate in many ways, a populist who wanted to run against the establishment in 2016. And essentially the Democrats rigged a lot of things against Bernie. And Bernie knows he's calling balls and strikes here, I think, pretty clearly. And I've actually in many ways admired Bernie Sanders. I remember it was in either 86 or 88 He unseated the liberal Republican congressman that represented Vermont. Vermont only has one at-large seat. It was a liberal Republican. I believe it was 86, but it might have been 88. And Bernie Sanders gets the endorsement of the National Rifle Association. And that helps put him over the top to beat a liberal Republican, an avowed socialist. Yes, the National Rifle Association endorsed a socialist because he was pro-Second Amendment. Interesting story. So you can see that there's a lot of things going on here that you can't just put in real simple boxes, kind of like me, right? Like a lot of people want to call me a progressive. I'm like, I've never said I was a progressive. If anything, I've said I'm more libertarian. And I kind of am sympathetic to certain aspects of populism. Another reason why I liked Bernie Sanders so much is that when Ron Paul and Bernie served in Congress, they co-sponsored legislation together constantly. He called it tripartisan. In other words, they would get a Republican sponsor, an independent, in Bernie, and then Democrats. So they do tripartisan legislation. And I think that Ron Paul and Bernie Sanders in Congress was a good thing. And I wish we had more of that kind of political cross-pollination going on. So what I thought was interesting is I didn't know that if Trump was going to win, because Michael Moore and a few other people who I felt kind of had the pulse on things. Michael Moore said in 2016 that, Trump's going to win. And then he was saying Kamala's going to win by a landslide this time around. So that gave me pause because I feel like Michael Moore, at least at one point, had his pulse on the American worker. Obviously, he doesn't anymore. He's lost touch. But I kind of still thought maybe he still did. I'm just reading some of these thieves. I knew Hillary when I was in high school. At the time, she was head of the Young Republicans. I still have the Goldwater Miller pin she gave me. That's absolutely right, Bruce Nelson. Hillary Clinton was a Goldwater girl. Interesting. And he is, of course, viewed as was at the time a right-wing demagogue. And yeah, so isn't it interesting how political allegiances and views can change? And I tell people, it said that in an alternative universe, there is a version of Donald Trump that's a left-wing populist that gets elected. Because obviously the man, in many ways, is apolitical. He's very transactional. And you have to understand, I know this for a fact, because in the year 2000, he briefly ran for the Reform Party nomination as somebody who wanted to take on and defeat Pat Buchanan, who would eventually get the nomination. And he was adamantly pro-abortion, like totally pro-abortion, and was absolutely against Pat Buchanan in his policies, which is so fascinating because basically Trump then in 2016 would run under the exact same platform that Pat Buchanan ran under. Isn't it interesting just how things change and how politics can be so pliable? And then Richard Paycheck says, just let Donald golf. Yeah. And then he says, I voted for Reagan before I voted against him. Yep. Diamond Dave, welcome to the program. So, so I think there's just a lot to unpack here. I think that Democrats really do need to look in the mirror and decide what kind of party they are. Now, I look at it this way. My Republican Party, and again, I've never claimed to be a fan of Donald Trump, but I stepped back and thought to myself, okay, this is the new world we live in. What does this mean? And that was like, okay, will the Republican Party receive the majority of Hispanic male vote? It got about 46% of the Hispanic Latino vote overall. The way this is cycling, it looks to me like it's eventually that the Hispanics will be majority in favor of Republicans here on out. Then we saw that in places like Georgia, that 25% of black men voted for Donald Trump. Then we saw that the most Hispanic state in the United States that hadn't voted for a Republican since 1892 overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump. We also saw that white women who supported Trump in 2016 supported Biden. That's the key factor, is the white suburban women have been the ones that have played the role. They went for Biden in 2020. They went back to Trump in 2024. Even with the Democrats using reproductive rights and stuff as their main thing, white suburban women switched back to Donald Trump. That should be very telling. This is just reading here. Just join. One thing to point out, Utah is one of two states that didn't shift towards Trump. Yes, and actually Prep Project brings this up. And I actually want to talk about that. Because what was so fascinating is that evangelicals pretty much supported Trump. Appears at about the same levels they've supported him in the last few cycles. It's well over 80% either way. I'd be interested to see if there's any shifts in that area. But one of the more interesting shifts that I saw, and I've talked to a few people from Utah about this and Latter-day Saints about getting their perspective on it, was why is it that the one state that shifted a little bit more blue And the rest of the country, I mean, look, if you look at how much California shifted, how much New York shifted, how much New Jersey shifted, how much Illinois shifted. I mean, they substantially shifted in a much more conservative direction. It's shocking. I mean, if you want to know what the real story is look at this, look at the blue states that Camilla won, but look at the margins she won many of them by. Wasn't nearly as much as what Biden did. It was an astonishing thing. And I'm wondering, I want to hear from people that live in Utah. Why do you think that did Utah shift a little blue? I think it was California migration that moved Utah blue. That's one theory. However, IDK 4003, a lot of people left California to escape the Democrats. That's why it's like Florida, for the same reason people move to Florida. And Florida is no longer a swing state. It's become ruby red now. And so I wonder, is it migration? I also wonder, are there progressive Mormons? Like I've heard from others, like, yeah, there's people in my ward who couldn't stand Donald Trump and for this moral reasons. So maybe they supported Camilla or a third party that way. I often wonder too, is this the rise of the ex-Mormons? There is certainly the ex-Mormon movement is growing, and a lot of people who are ex-Mormon, I would say probably 70-80% are more progressive. So I'm just wondering if it's also indicative of the people that are leaving the church as well. I don't know. I just find that to be a very interesting shift as well. That's why I wanted to point that out. So there's a few other things I wanted to point out too, is of course we saw the rise of the Christian right starting in the 70s and 80s with Jerry Falwell's moral majority. Then you had Pat Robertson's presidential run in 1988, in which he finished second in the Iowa caucuses behind Bob Dole, but ahead of the vice president of the United States, George H.W. Bush, which was a shocker. That was really the beginning of the Christian evangelical takeover of the Republican Party, where they started showing that they are having electoral success. And it's so funny because Thomas Murphy was in Iowa at that time. He talks about one of my interviews, and he was in the caucuses, and he was actually fighting against Robertson at the time. Whereas I'm a little kid, and I grew up, I was wearing, my favorite t-shirt was a Robertson 88 t-shirt. So I'm still plugged into this world. So then we see the fruition of essentially the evangelical takeover of one of the most powerful political parties in the world. So this is all part of the story. And I think it's really important we just kind of step back and think, just seeing all the pieces as they come together. And now you can kind of understand why things happen the way they did. But I also want to talk about, why did certain people vote for Donald Trump? And I go back to those people in the Midwest where their company towns were destroyed by free trade that was signed by their president who was looking out for them. Okay. Those people were devastated. Those people were traumatized. And a lot of the people that are voting for Donald Trump are doing it because of experiencing from severe PTSD and trauma. This is a result of trauma that's happened to these communities. So for you, those people who attack people who voted for Donald Trump, you lack empathy if you can't put yourself in their shoes and try to understand why they voted the way they did. Okay. These are devastated people who feel like they've been screwed over and stabbed in the back by their own Democrat Party that they were lifelong supporters of. And it's like, what do they have to lose than voting for Donald Trump, because they've lost everything anyhow? And a lot of it was the betrayal that the Democrats did. This is just quite simply, this is all factual. There's no controversy here as to what happened. So you use these people's votes for all these generations. You don't do anything to help them. And then you sign into a legislation that essentially just guts their communities and their towns. And then you piss on them for voting for Trump. Haven't they been traumatized enough as it is? I'm sorry for the language, but I just kind of get ticked off at the lack of empathy that I feel that people have towards people that are different than them. In the beginning, at the very beginning of this channel, God placed me, and I tell people, God placed me in a spot where I was on one side holding my sign, and there are people on the other side of the street holding their signs. And people ask me, what did the sign say? It's not important. They didn't say anything. It just was the idea that there's people on my side, there's people on that other side. And God went to me and he said, listen, just remember this. Those people over there that disagree with you are still image bearers. Always remember that. So when I'm talking to people, even people that I disagree with, even with people that I don't necessarily like, I remind myself, fellow image bearer, and they should be afforded respect and dignity because we're all part of the same human community and we all bear his image. Okay. I'm just going through here. Okay. So it's with a lot of people, such for instance, put more in a mix in politics. So yeah, some people are just talking about some of the changes. Yeah, okay, so just giving some commentary here, not necessarily just part in the chat necessarily doesn't have to be shared. So I just think that we need to kind of all step back. I think the Democrat Party needs to do an assessment. Of course, every time the Republicans lose, the Democrats always wanted to lecture the Republicans. Well, this is what you got to change. You got to do this. You got to do that. Well, I think Democrats actually need to step back and look in the mirror for once and realize that maybe some of the stuff they did and some of the look, why couldn't Joe Biden, when he got elected, why couldn't he go and say, listen, people of faith, you're welcome in our party. People who are pro-life, you're welcome in our party. People who are pro-Second Amendment, you're welcome in our party. People who are pro-First Amendment are welcome in our party. But instead, he chose to go for the divisive route. There was a time when there were many pro-life Democrats in Congress. I remember them. I remember Senator Bob Casey's father, Robert Casey. He was one of the strongest pro-life governors in the country. There was a time when there were look, heck, Bernie Sanders was endorsed by the National Rifle Association. There was a time when there were conservative Democrats, there were liberal Republicans, and I kind of feel like because it's become so bad and so partisan, and I think it's caused things to be out of balance. I think what happens is if you go too far in one direction, whether it's to the right or to the left, you lose your moorings. I think that the parties in the past that had both a conservative and liberal wings were more balanced. And actually, we were able to get, I don't know, I think there was more political harmony as a result. We don't have that anymore. That's hyper-partisanship that's happened. And yeah, it kind of started with the Republican Revolution in '94. That's, in that sense, the Republicans might have started it. But, I just think that we just have to kind of sit back, understand why we are here. And then the question is, okay, so now I look at it and say, okay, what is the Republican Party? The Republican Party, like I said, is become a party that's more Black men are voting for. It's become a party that majority of Hispanic men are now voting for. It's the party that blue-collar workers are voting for, union households are voting for. There's a reason why the Teamsters didn't endorse anybody, because the majority of them were pro-Trump. That it's become women are back. You have white suburban women are now back in this tent. So the Republican tent is getting bigger and bigger. They used to say the Republican Party had a demographic problem and the Democrats had a geography problem. The demographic being, can the Republicans ever win the popular vote? And the geographic problem was the electoral system, the way it was set up, that kind of favors Republicans. Well, now Donald Trump won the popular vote and won the Electoral College. So this is a political realignment that's happened in this country. Now I'm trying to think of what does this mean? Well, it means that what's happened to the Democrat Party? The Democrat Party essentially has become a party of the coasts. You could call them the elites, people that are higher education levels. People that are in higher education. People have advanced degrees and PhDs, and Black women. Those are really the two core groups within the Democrat Party. You could say the LGBTQ community is also there, but it's interesting. It's I think there's diversity within that group too. But again, LGBTQ people make up a very small percentage of the population. So let's just say the party of the Eastern elites, East and Western elites, and the coastal elites, and Black women, and largely LGBTQ people, and that's the coalition of the Democrats. Now, the Democrat Party, of course, was always the party of the working man, of the small guy, and all this kind of stuff. And none of the working class people feel that way about the party because they've left that party in droves. So not only does the Democrat Party now have a geography problem with the Electoral College, it appears that they're going to have a problem with the population, with the popular vote too. So I think we've seen a fundamental shift in what's in our political calculus here. So now, what do we have to work with? Well, if you're the Republican Party and you have this broad coalition, do us a favor and don't blow it like Boris Johnson did when he got elected by a landslide with a lot of labor votes and then squandered it. A lot of people have loaned their votes to you. And I think it's important that the Republican Party do right by the folks that got them elected. And I think it's important that they do that, because if they don't, then you're going to probably see the rise of perhaps even more radical populist movements that happen. This is just in many ways could be the beginning of something, but this also could be a political realignment that maybe because the alignment has been happening over the course of the last 10, 15 years, that's part of the tumultuous times that we're in. Maybe once we have a political alignment and it kind of stabilizes, perhaps that will bring stability to our political process. That's just me talking out loud. I'm maybe being hopeful and maybe overly optimistic here, but I try to be optimistic. Um, so yeah, there's just a lot going on in this country, and I'll have more to say. Like I said, I don't like to use this platform to talk politics, and I try to be fair to both sides because, again, I have friends in all the different camps, and they're all still friends before the election and after the election. And if I said anything to offend anybody, I want to apologize in advance. I'm just speaking off the top of my head. I think it's important that we have this conversation and find out, the evangelicals are largely responsible for Trump being elected. Latter-day Saints, in many ways, still voted overwhelmingly in favor of Donald Trump as well, even though there was some shifting going on in Utah. But is that Latter-day Saints, or is that more progressive Latter-day Saints? Is that the shifting of maybe more people leaving the church and becoming more progressive? Is it people moving in? There's various factors there, but I did find that very interesting that Utah was the only state that shifted slightly blue. And then Richard Pichek says, Switzerland never won a war. That's true, but they don't get into wars, which is a good thing, right? See, I'm an anti-war. I've been an anti-war Republican. That's part of why on some things that really bothers me what's happened. But then I think to myself, okay, well, in the 1990s, I was supportive of essentially, I was against NAFTA. I was also against war. And those were two of the big things that Republicans were known for, as being the party of free trade and war. And now the Republican Party has become the party that wants to look out for the interests of the American worker, we hope, and also doesn't want to go to war and be the world's policeman, which is actually what George W. Bush ran under in 2000. He didn't want to be the world's policeman, which, of course, then 9/11 happened. And then, of course, the disastrous military campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan that nobody supports or thinks that was the right thing to do. Nobody thinks that anymore. And just think of the trillions of dollars of blood and soil. It's just devastating just to think where this last 30 years, when we look back at it, we're going to look at the 90s as being kind of like the last time where America was kind of normal and stable. And it's just been one thing after another since the year 2000, really, since Y2K didn't happen, but then we had the presidential election in 2000, and really just this country's gotten more and more divided ever since. Okay, so let me think here. I should consider the Quakers or the J-Dubs. Let the weird begin. Thanks, Richard. For those of you who'd like to make a donation to the channel right now in the live chat, please feel free to do. Somebody gave me a $4.99 one right at the end, right as I logged off. I also wanted to remind people that I did last week mention this, and I'll mention this again. I have some friends, and I'll put this in the description, who their house was destroyed in the Hurricane Helene. And they're on my Facebook page. There's a link there. They're trying to raise $20,000. That's the big oak tree landed in their home. When I'm done here, I'll put this donation thing in the description. So for those of you who'd like to make a donation to help them, that would be greatly appreciated. They're good friends of mine who live in northern Florida. Okay, well, I've been 35 minutes in. Got a decent amount of people chatting here. Always love that. I'll stick around for another minute or two if any of you have any questions or comments. I did interview somebody who's an accountant about tithing today, which is really interesting. He's got a really interesting take on tithing that actually maybe may make it more possible for more people to participate in tithing and not cost them as much as they thought it would. And that's going to be a really interesting conversation, I think. Also, lining up a few other interviews, still working on a couple breaking stories, but it just takes time for these. I got to sometimes sit on them, and that happens. Also, just want to thank Mom, and I want to thank you for all your love and support you've been giving us. Mom's hands are getting better. She's able to drive now again. She's getting more and more strength in her hands. I still have to open up all her water bottles and put them in the refrigerator for her. So she still doesn't have all her strength back. We actually had a dinner party at a friend's house right before, so we hung out with them. And also in my right ear, I still have a lot of the ringing and the hypoacusis with the tinnitus. Richard says, hug Mom and take her for walks. I will as soon as the weather gets cool again. It's like August again here. Actually, I got to get a bike tire. Her tire got flat, and I've got to get that bike tire replaced, a bike tube. so she can start riding her bike again and get more exercise, which is I need to do that too. But right now it's quite warm. So yeah, but I've noticed that my hearing, I think, has slightly improved in my right ear. Richard says, I work with seniors and keep moving. My mom is 84 years old. You'd never think she was. She is very healthy. She painted the house, the inside of the house. She's amazing. I even tell mom, are you sure you want to get on that ladder? But she's amazing. And she does a really good job. And yeah, she's still very active, very healthy. My little incident here with losing the hearing loss, we think it's definitely autoimmune. I got an appointment at the Sarasota Arthritis Clinic in 2 weeks. Go over some blood work. I had 12 vials taken out, trying to figure out what was the autoimmune condition that caused this sudden hearing loss on my ear. So that's where we're at. Richard says, good job, Mom. Yeah, Mom does a good job. She's still at that dinner party with my friends, by the way. So they're just neighbors that just 2 doors down had us over. So I think that's about it. I just want to thank everybody again for just all the support we've received. I also want to mention people that, I get authors send me books in the mail. Just a reminder to you authors who send me books in the mail, please follow up. I just actually had somebody message me saying, hey, did you get my book in the mail? I'm like, no, I didn't get it. And he said it arrived on the 5th. And I said, I didn't get it. So make sure you got my right address when you reach out to me on my email, mormonbookreviews.com, if you want to send me a copy of your book. But then after you send me the copy, you got to be persistent. It's the people that are the squeaky, it's the squeaky wheel that gets the grease, whatever. Those are the ones that get on the program. I can't keep up with all these books. There's a lot of books I want to get caught up on and read. Of course, we had the hurricanes. We've effectively had 2.5 months of programming that did not happen as a result of the hurricanes, as well as my health. So we're just calling back. And if you have any family and friends that you think would be interested in this channel, or if you're just a lurker and you don't have a YouTube account, make a YouTube account and subscribe to Mormon Book Reviews, people. All right. So, well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation I had today with you. I hope you don't think that I'm trying to be overly partisan one way or another here. I think it's really important to understand why Donald Trump got elected and reelected and almost got elected in 2000. It's an astonishing political story. And many people loathe and hate him and don't like him. And also all that. I understand where you're coming from, but I also think this is the country we live in. And the people have spoken. And so we all need to kind of look back and say, okay, what can I do to make the best of this? What can I do to help America? What can we do to help bring unity to this country? It all starts at home. It starts with your neighbors. It starts with people in your church. It starts with your friends that you hang out with. Maybe agree or disagree with them. But make sure you stay friends with these people, whether they're on your side or not. It's really important that we don't let people's personal friendships and relationships and familial relationships get destroyed because of politics. Don't let that happen to you. Don't let that happen to your family and friends. Remember that everybody's an image bearer, whether you believe in God or not. We all do. We are all part of the human community. And the only way that we can bring healing to this country is we need to bring down the temperature and not let what happens in Washington affect our daily lives. Keep on living the life that you live. Love the people that you love. Support your local community efforts. And there's plenty of things that you can do good. You can volunteer at a soup kitchen. You can do work for the homeless. You can do a lot of good things for people, regardless of who's in the White House. You can still be a light in this world. And I think it's so important. And this isn't just for people who believe in a higher power. This is for everyone. Get more involved in your community. Get to understand people where they're coming from. Why did they vote the way they did? Rather than attack them being this or that, and both sides do this. It's ugly on both sides. I'm not, it's a pox on both sides as far as I'm concerned. But just remember that we all are in this country, and we got to accept this is where we live. Now, there are going to be a handful of people that are going to leave this country, but 90% of the people who said they're going to move are not going to move. They're going to stay here. That's the reality. There will be a few high-profile people that will probably move out, but for the most part, there's not going to be a mass American exodus. There just isn't. There wasn't in 2016, and there were a lot of people saying in 2004, if George W. Bush gets reelected, I'm leaving. And I know one person that did, John Hamer, he did, and to his credit, I'm like, hey, you're progressive, you live in your values, you feel Canada represents your views more than America does. That's fine. I respect you for actually following through with that. So I won't diss John Hamer at all. I think Don, in many ways, like, he's a hero to me. Like, yeah, you're living your principles. If you feel strongly enough about this to leave the country, I respect you for actually going through and doing it. So I won't say you're a hater. I'm saying, like, no, you're living your ideals and principles. Now, what's interesting is that next year Canada is going to elect Pierre Poilievre, who is very conservative and is remaking the Conservative Party in Canada in a very similar way that's happened in America. So there's that reality too. And it is interesting that you're seeing the rise of the right in both Europe and across the world, whether it's in Argentina and other countries. And it's also interesting to see that in these last European elections, the Green parties got eviscerated all across Europe. Why? Well, the Green parties won the last or did well in the last European elections. Why? Because the youth vote. Well, guess what happened this time around? The youth vote switched, and the rise of the anti-immigrant parties rose as a direct response of the youth in Europe have become more right wing. So this is a movement that you have to understand is not going away anytime soon. It's only going to grow. So we have to realize that's just the reality of the situation that we are in, and that's what we got to do. We just got to accept this. And then if you feel you need to fight for your values and your principles, I say do it in the ballot box. Do it peacefully. That's the important thing. Continue to be active. Continue to be passionate for your values and what's important to you. And like I said, whatever side you're on, be engaged. I just want to wrap this up with one last thing. Was my pastor, I was at church this past Sunday, Pastor Don Miner of the Harvest in Sarasota. And the Harvest is kind of viewed as kind of being progressive leaning, but there are Trump supporters there. And he said that everyone is welcome in this church. And the person says, so you're saying that if somebody was wearing a red hat with white lettering on it, supporting a particular candidate, they would be welcome in our church? He says, absolutely. They'd be welcome in our church. That's the space that we need to occupy as Christians. The door should be open to everyone. And there should not be a litmus test on who you're voting for. Is what gets you accepted into the group or into the community. It should be open to everyone. And my pastor said, after the election, no matter what happens, half the country is going to be devastated in mourning. And he said, whatever you do, don't spike the football too hard if your side wins. Show compassion for people where they're at and show empathy for them. There's a reason why Donald Trump won. There's a reason why Donald Trump effectively won by a landslide in this election. And Democrats need to look in the mirror and understand what happened to them. They lost touch with the roots of their own party, and they lost it. And now what used to be the foundational base of the Democrat Party in the 1990s, places like West Virginia, are now the foundation of the Republican Party. That's an incredible political alignment. That's amazing. And this is the new political reality that we live in. So now Democrats are going to have to think of different ways to attract people who voted for, literally, in order for Democrats to win the next election, they're going to have to be able to make a play for millions of Trump voters. It's the only way they can win. They need to convince millions of Trump voters to vote for them in 2028. They can't continue to move in that leftist direction because they're just going to continue to lose these suburban areas. You're going to certainly lose the rural areas, the working class areas. Look at even just how well Donald Trump did in Arab communities in Michigan. Astonishing numbers. I mean, there's a political realignment going on here that people need to understand. To like and subscribe, but not today. I'd tell you to like and doesn't have a whole lot of empathy for people. Yeah, so everybody must look. I get everything you're saying, everybody. I want to just remind everybody that this is the Switzerland of Mormonism. This is essentially the only neutral Mormon podcast, and I'm going to be resolute in the neutrality of this channel. I can go, and I'm not going to go and make this into a political channel or a partisan channel. This is a nonpartisan channel. Everyone is welcome here, okay? And for those of you who are grieving right now, I grieve with you too. I want you to know that my heart goes out to everyone. I am not, like I said, the biggest Trump supporter in the world by any means. I think people have known that I've been very critical of what's happened to my party. But now this is the shift that's happened. So now I've got to find a way. I got to find some bearings here to say, okay, what does this mean for me? Where do I go from here? What party represents my values? In many ways, the shifts that happened in the Republican Party have been kind of what I would have been supportive of in the past. But then there's other things that really bother me. Oh my gosh, it really bothered me about my party. But then there's things about the Democrats that just drive me nuts, So it's really hard to be essentially politically homeless. But we're going to navigate these waters together, folks. The next 4 years, let's just pray for our country and just remember that, the people across the street that have the signs that are different than you, maybe reach out to them and try to have a conversation. So why did you vote for who you voted for? And maybe listen to what they have to say. These are ugly times we're in. We need to try to lower the temperature, and we if and the only way this works is both sides do it. If only one side's willing to do it, it's not going to work. Both sides need to be able to lower the temperature here. And also, you're responsible for you and how you're going to act and respond as well. Listen, I got into an argument at the dinner party today over politics. I shouldn't have, and it was petty, but I kind of just was a little livid about some stuff this guy was saying, stuff that just aren't true, untrue things that have been said in these campaigns. But I feel sometimes I do need to speak out. For the most part, I do want to listen to what people have to say. Andrew says Whig Party in 2028. I know they tried to bring that back a few years ago. Andrew says, sadly, I think it's time for the Dems to fold. Okay. Well, it's been 45 minutes in. I enjoyed it. Didn't plan on talking this long. I just want to thank everybody for all your support. Mom and I do really appreciate you. These have been very trying times this past year. But we're going to get through it. We're going to come through this stronger than before. And we're going to go from there. So remember, the most important thing is this. Remember, all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.